When you think of the Peloponnesian War, two names probably jump to mind: Athens and Sparta, right? The elephant versus the whale, this epic clash of titans that shaped the ancient Greek world. But what if I told you that whole legendary rivalry is only part of the story? What if the city-state that actually lit the fuse for that massive conflict wasn't either of them? Today, we're taking a hard look at Corinth.
Yeah, we've all heard the simple version. The Greek world, split right down the middle, a huge showdown between two superpowers. But history, well, it's rarely that neat and tidy, is it? The truth is always more of a tangled web of alliances, old grudges, and competing interests. And sitting right there in the middle of that web is a third power, one we often forget.
So, how important was Corinth, really? I mean, were they just a side character? Not at all. Far from being some minor player, in the 5th century BC, Corinth was an absolute giant of maritime trade and commerce. Before we can even begin to understand their role in the war, we have to appreciate just how much power they really had.
And hey, we've got actual physical proof of this. This is the Serpent Column, a monument built to celebrate the Greek victory over Persia. Now, if you look at the names inscribed on it, the order is incredibly telling. First, you've got Sparta, then Athens. And right there at number 3, Corinth. Not Thebes, not Argos, Corinth. That's their status, literally carved in bronze for everyone to see. A top-tier power, right alongside the big two.
All right, so here's our game plan for making the case. We're going to start by uncovering the deep-seated hatred between Corinth and Athens. Then we'll pinpoint the exact moment when things went too far, when there was no turning back. We'll see how Corinth literally beat the drums of war and why they even refused to make peace later on. And finally, we'll deliver our verdict. Was Corinth the real catalyst? So this massive conflict didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The rivalry between Athens and Corinth had been simmering for decades, mostly over trade routes and influence. But one specific event, one betrayal, turned that rivalry into pure, unadulterated hatred. It all kicks off around 460 BC with a city-state called Megara. Now, Megara was a long-time loyal Corinthian ally, but then they did the unthinkable. They switched sides and joined up with Athens. Athens, of course, jumped at the chance. They built these long walls for Megara that effectively blocked Corinth's land access. For Corinth, this wasn't just a strategic problem, it was a deep, personal humiliation happening right in their own backyard.
And look, we don't even have to guess how Corinth felt about this. The great historian Thucydides lays it out for us crystal clear. He directly connects this whole Megarian affair to the birth of what he calls a bitter hatred that Corinth felt for Athens. This wasn't just politics anymore, it was personal. And that resentment, it would just fester under the surface for the next 30 years, just waiting for a chance to explode. Okay, let's fast forward to the 430s BC. That simmering hatred is about to boil over. Two separate crises erupt, both involving Corinth's colonies, and both times, Athens steps in and directly challenges Corinth. These were the sparks that would end up setting the entire Greek world on fire. The two flashpoints were Corcyra and Potidaea. Think of it as a 1-2 punch. First, in Corcyra, Athens makes an alliance with Corinth's rebellious colony, and their ships end up fighting Corinth's fleet directly. Then, over in Potidaea, which was a Corinthian colony that was forced to pay tribute to Athens, Athens demands they kick out their Corinthian leaders and cut all ties. So one was a direct challenge to Corinth's navy, the other to its colonial authority. Together, they struck at the very heart of Corinthian power and pride.
And just listen to how Corcyra pitched their case to the Athenians. Thucydides records their speech, and it's brilliant. They frame it perfectly, saying, look, Corinth is already your enemy. Helping us isn't starting a new fight, you're just getting a head start on one that's already coming. They basically told Athens, help us fight your enemy now before they come for you later. It was an offer that was just too good for Athens to pass up. Corinth's response was, well, there was no mistaking it. It was a clear line in the sand. Thucydides gives us their stark message to Athens. If you interfere, you are declaring war on us, period. The battle lines were drawn, and Athens chose to step right over them, setting the entire Peloponnesian League on a collision course. So now, tensions are at a fever pitch. Humiliated and furious, Corinth didn't just wait around for war to happen. They went out and manufactured it. They launched this full-scale diplomatic assault with one single goal in mind: to force a very hesitant Sparta to finally declare war on Athens. And you have to admit, their strategy was a masterclass in political pressure. First, they demand an emergency meeting of Sparta's entire alliance. Then, they get up and they lay out every single one of Athens' aggressions. Then, and this is the crucial part, they frame all of it as a direct violation of the existing peace treaty. And their final move? It was pure psychological warfare. They shamed Sparta, right in front of everyone, for doing nothing.
I mean, just listen to this. You can feel the raw frustration in the Corinthian ambassador's speech. Thucydides captures them essentially yelling at the Spartans. "We told you so. We've been warning you about Athens for years, and you just sat there and did nothing. You questioned us. And now we're suffering, and it's your fault for being so slow." It was a direct public challenge to Sparta's honor and its leadership of the league.
And it worked. It absolutely worked. The combination of legal arguments and that very public shaming was just too much for Sparta to ignore. The assembly voted. Athens had broken the treaty. War was necessary. The Peloponnesian War was on. And this war, you could argue, had been engineered, pushed, and ultimately forced into existence by one very determined city-state, Corinth.
You'd think after a decade of brutal, bloody fighting, everyone would be ready for a break. But Corinth's thirst for war didn't just fade away. When Athens and Sparta were finally exhausted and ready for a truce, Corinth basically said, "Nope, we're not done." They wanted one thing, and one thing only, the complete and utter destruction of Athens.
In 421 BC, Athens and Sparta signed the Peace of Nicias. The war was supposed to be over, but Corinth, along with a few other key allies, refused to sign it. And Thucydides tells us they didn't just reject the peace treaty, they immediately started plotting behind the scenes to undermine it and get the war started again. For them, peace was simply not an option. So after all of this, what's the final verdict on Corinth's role? To really answer that, we can actually use the framework of the guy who wrote the definitive history of the war himself, Thucydides. See, Thucydides made this really smart distinction between two kinds of causes. First, there's the prophasis. That's the truest, deepest, underlying reason for the whole thing, the why. And then you have the itia. These are the immediate complaints, the public justifications, the official reasons given for starting the fight. Think of it as the real reason versus the stated reasons. And this slide gives us the perfect way to think about it. The underlying cause, the prophasis, was the tinderbox, this massive, explosive growth of Athenian power and the fear it created in Sparta. That was the fuel. But a tinderbox just sits there until something provides a spark. And the itai, the specific Corinthian grievances over Carcyra and Potidaea, that was the spark. Without Corinth's relentless agitation, that tinderbox might have just smoldered for years. But with Corinth, war was pretty much guaranteed. Which leaves us with one last really fascinating question to chew on. Maybe the clash between an expanding Athens and a fearful Sparta was inevitable in the long run. But could the specific, devastating war that kicked off in 431 BC have been delayed? Or maybe, just maybe, avoided altogether if it wasn't for the bitter hatred and the relentless political maneuvering of its forgotten third power, Corinth? That's something to think about.